sometimes that can be good, sometimes not so great.
Yeah, most of the time, not so great. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But yeah, so back to like, I just like to talk about how like the expectations versus how things went for you. So as far as like pregnancy, you said that you really didn't have too much crazy happening in your pregnancy, but it was a lot of like anxiety as far as like what to expect, I think. So a lot of like my pregnancy, I was just waiting. It just felt like a lot of waiting and a lot of wondering and a lot of like just stress, like not knowing what's going to happen. And then you can like go into labor anytime. Like after a certain amount of
Yeah,
time, you're like, okay, I could like go into labor now. I used to just sit on the couch. I'm like, I could go into labor right now. Like it's just so
right.
crazy to think about. So yeah, did you like in your pregnancy, did you enjoy being that person, like, pregnant? Because I feel like I should have taken advantage of it more and been like, "I'm
Yeah,
pregnant. Like,
yeah, and
leave
that's
me alone."
right, and yeah, that's the thing is, like, there are so many people that, like, enjoy being pregnant. For me, it was like I didn't mind being pregnant. And like you kind of like you go through those cravings and like, my husband was
Mhm.
super supportive, always getting me like anything I needed and things like that. So that was super helpful. But um I don't know. I towards the end I was just like, I hope that like he just comes because I just was
Mhm.
like, I'm ready for this baby to be here. Like I was
Ready.
tired of being pregnant. I just wanted him here. And
Mhm.
just like the kicking all the time, or like he would get hiccups every single day.
Yeah.
And you can feel that, and it's just like for me, it was unsettling, like, it made me uncomfortable.
Yeah. I didn't have that. I was, like, the opposite. My son, he was called it was called Frank Breech. Wow, can I talk? It's called Frank Breech, so basically, like, his butt was down and his head and feet were, like, in front his feet were in front of his head.
Oh,
So
yes.
and you're supposed to turn, like, eventually, and the whole pregnancy, they're like, "Oh, he'll turn around, he'll get the right way, whatever." And then, it was, like, nearing the end there, I was huge. Like, I just was looking at pictures and videos, like, the other day since he just turned 1. My nose
Yeah.
was, like, 3 times the size. It's just crazy
Well,
to see
yeah,
myself,
like,
but
you
anyways.
swell up and you just swell up.
Yeah, it's crazy. I don't think I noticed I mean, I noticed it, but I didn't realize how much until now. I'm like, "Whoa."
Yeah.
So but he was, upside down, so I was trying to do some, like, moves on the ground, like, to try and move him, and I put myself in labor.
Oh my gosh, you're kidding.
Yeah, I was trying to flip him by, like, laying on the ground, doing stretches, whatever, and then I went to bed, like, an hour later, and my water broke, and he was on the way.
Oh my gosh. Well, you know what? That's good for you too that, like, your water, like, broke and that's how you knew because, like,
Right.
I think that happens to, like, a very small percent of
I
people
think
where,
it's
like, the water
20%.
breaking.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, the water breaking is, like, the first sign of labor, and, like, I hear that that's, like, pretty slim for most people, like, that doesn't
Yeah.
always happen first.
Yeah. For anybody listening, there's a lot out there. Like, in the movies, they show everything so dramatic, and I think it's easier to just be like, "Okay, in the movie, her water's gonna break," and, it's just an easy
Yeah.
way to show labor starting. But, like and then in labor, just the way they portray it, how did you actually, I wanted to ask you about, did you have a birth plan? Did you feel like you wanted and I know it's not supposed to be called a birth plan, but you know what I mean by that, like and for
Yeah.
those listening who are pregnant or planning to be pregnant or whatever, there you can choose to have a birth plan, but a lot of people say birth preferences because anything can happen when you're about to have a baby, which I found
Right.
out myself. So it is good though. I would recommend having some type of like at least going through what would be on a birth plan so that you know what to expect. You know the words of like what people are going to do if they have to go
Yeah.
in and do something different. So did you plan ahead for that, like what you would want?
Kind of for the most part. I think it was around like 30 weeks. We had done some just like online, labor and delivery classes, first year of life
Mhm.
classes, things like that, to kind of just like give us an idea. And my mother in
Right.
law actually, she was like, as it got closer, she's like, try to go in with like no expectation. She's like, if you want to go in and try and do a natural birth, that's great, but don't be disappointed if you can't.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so I kind of just like had to like mentally prepare for both options.
Right.
So that was like something that, had like weighed on me. But
Mhm.
I wouldn't say I had much of a birth plan. Like we just, we knew to be packed. And I had told him like very specific things that I like wanted him to relay in case I forgot, or I
Right.
just like I was so in the moment that like I wasn't
Mhm.
thinking of those things.
Mhm.
So there were plenty of times like once we were there that like he had to like speak up and like,
Yeah.
say those things for me because like I forgot and wasn't thinking about that.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah,
but
that's
really,
really important.
yeah. And really my only thing was like, like once we're in there, like I want to try and, deliver naturally. And,
Mhm.
it was like small things like maybe like certain like poses to like when you're pushing,
Mhm.
like whether it's side lying or like on all fours,
Mhm.
things like that. So I wouldn't say I had a birth plan, just like kind of like some small things I wanted to think about
Mhm.
once we were there and through in that process.
Yeah. Do you mind telling us a little bit about, like, how you went into labor?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. So I was actually 2 days late. And like at that point I was ready, but my husband and I we went out to dinner like the night before. We came home and he was not feeling well. So we went to bed at like 9 o'clock, and I woke up at 1 in the morning and I was like, I think I'm having contractions.
Ah!
So I was like, okay, like after it was pretty consistent, like I was timing them for how long they were, how many minutes apart. So they, lasted about like 30 seconds and anywhere from
Mhm.
like 5 to 7 minutes apart.
Mhm.
So I went back to bed and I stayed in bed till like 4 a.m. And then they got a little bit more intense around like
Mhm.
4 o'clock. So I came downstairs because I was like, I'm going to try and labor at home as long as possible.
Mhm.
And I think at like 6 a.m., I called my doctor and she gave me a call an hour later. And she's like, you're definitely in labor.
Mhm.
She's like, head to the hospital when you feel you're ready. Um, so at like 7 o'clock, I go upstairs and I go to wake my husband. I'm like, good morning. And he's like, good morning. I was like, how are you feeling? And he goes, oh, I feel so much better. And I was like, oh, good, because I'm in labor. We gotta go.
I love that.
And he like sprung out of bed and was like, oh my God, it's happening. So he's like running around and I was like, remain calm. I
Mm.
was like, I'm gonna take a shower, we'll eat breakfast, and then we'll go. So I was like trying to like,
Wow.
push through all that. And by the time I got out of the shower, he had breakfast made, and I think I took one bite of breakfast, and I had the worst contraction yet.
Mm.
And I was like, we need to go. So we were driving to the hospital, and it got, increasingly worse along the way. And then at that point, I was just crying because I was like, what if I waited too long?
Ah. Mhm.
And yeah, so by the time we got to the hospital, I just was, I had to like, they got me a wheelchair, they got me up on the floor, and I could just like barely talk. The nurse was asking me all these questions, and
Mhm.
I just, you're not focusing on that stuff. And at that point,
Yeah.
you're agitated because you're like, you
Yeah.
know, you want to get
Yeah.
situated. So she's like, if I had to guess, you're probably about like 5 to 6 centimeters at this point. So she gets me into a room, and like my first question was like, is it too late for an epidural?
Mm.
And at that, because I was just in so much pain at that point, and I was so worried I
Yeah.
missed my window. Um, and to be honest, I think, before going into labor, the epidural was one of the things that I was just very nervous about.
Mhm.
Because they make you sign all these forms, and, there are certain things that can go wrong with that. So I was almost just as nervous for that as I was for delivery.
Yeah.
But at
Mhm.
that point, you're just in so much pain, you don't care.
Mhm.
So they brought the doctor in. They did the epidural, and within 10 minutes, it like
Wow.
all I could say to like my mom and my husband, I was like, this is like this is God's gift to women. Like I did not
Wow.
feel a thing, and it took all the pain away. Um, I felt amazing. I labored all
Yeah.
day, not feeling a
Wow.
single thing. And then my water didn't break until 2 hours before I started pushing.
When was
Uh,
that?
so that happened like very late. So my water broke at around, I would say like 1 or 2 o'clock
Mm.
after laboring all day, after getting to the hospital at 8 a.m.
Wow.
So my water didn't break until a couple hours before then. Um,
It naturally broke? They didn't break it?
yeah, and it broke on its own,
Mm.
which I was happy for.
Yeah.
Um, and then like 4 o'clock rolls around, they're like, all right, it's time. And you just kind of, I think in that
That
point, you
gives
just
me
like,
the chills just, like, because I remember that. Like, I feel like
yes.
they all say, like, "It's time."
Yeah. And at that
Yeah.
point, you're like, you're ready, but you're just also so nervous. You're like, okay, this is happening now. Like, we're about
Mhm.
to bring a child into this world, and like our lives are going to be changed in the next few hours.
Yeah. Mhm.
And the nurse was like, don't get discouraged. She's like, you're a first time mom. Expect to be here like 3 to 4 hours. And I was so persistent. I was just like, no, like,
Mhm.
so in an hour and 15 minutes later, he was here. And
Wow.
it was just the whole process itself is just amazing. Like, just like laboring all day, delivering. It's like you don't realize like the magnitude of what you're doing and like how amazing it really is.
Mhm.
Just like your body going through that is just absolutely incredible.
Yeah, it's truly that there's no word for it, honestly.
No.
And I love hearing those stories because it makes me happy, especially because you were like had a good, experience and you're healthy and your son's healthy. I think like everything went well, right?
Yeah, yeah. After
Yeah.
that, he was failing his sugar tests, so we were in the hospital a little bit longer than expected with that. And he did have jaundice, but those things, ended up clearing up within, the first couple weeks of his life. So other than
Mhm.
that, he's a healthy boy.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. I love hearing about that. Did you remember like what you couldn't recall, like what your husband had to help you out with? Just this did you say just the, like, positions and stuff, or was there
Yeah,
other things? Yeah.
positions, and then to avoid certain things happening, like he was like, "Oh, she wants like a warm compress and things like
Mhm.
that." Like
Yeah.
you're not thinking about any of that stuff.
Yeah.
And then I think, like, once he was out, it's just like you're in such shock and I think a little bit of like disbelief.
Mhm.
So me personally, I just was like, I just didn't know what to do. I was just like, "Is he
Yeah.
crying? Is he healthy?" Like, I don't even remember him crying, but I asked them, "Is he crying?" And they're like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, he's crying." Like, they had to tell me, and
Yeah.
clearly he
Yeah.
was. I
Yeah.
think, just overwhelmed and in shock. Um, but it's right when that moment comes, there's just so much that goes into it. They're doing everything that they can to like make sure he's
Mhm.
good. And then,
Mhm.
the second they put, your baby like on you and you have that skin to skin, it's just like this
Mhm.
life changing feeling.
Yeah. And that reminds me, I mean, that brings up a point about the birth plan. The one thing I thought, like, I would absolutely like, there would be no problem doing is skin to skin, and I didn't do that, and that's something that I mean, I don't wanna scare anyone, but that's something that I would recommend even just being a little bit persistent on, even though you feel like that's something that's just natural that happens every time.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of my birth plan, honestly and like I said, it's preferences. I actually went through it with a therapist, which I've mentioned already on the podcast that I did go to therapy, and I talked through everything, and we did a birth preference sheet, and a bunch of things didn't work out, but everything's okay. But it was an emergency C-section because he was breech and he couldn't come out natural way. And then I went from like 1 centimeter to 10 or to 9 in like no time at all. So I was passing out, throwing up. It
Oh,
was like, I'm okay. Everything's okay. I actually found
good.
out I had preeclampsia after the fact. So if I had known that, who knows how I would have been feeling too. So, and my husband, he probably would have been freaking out more. But with that whole thing, like, a couple things to take away from that. Yes, that was scary and unexpected, but everybody's there who knows what they're doing. You have somebody there with you. Thankfully, I was able to have my husband there. And I think the best thing I did was just familiarize myself with the different choices I could have. And even though a lot of things were taken away from me, I felt at least prepared going into it. So I wasn't able to since I had a C-section, things were different, but I planned on a C-section, so because I had to.